Imagine soldiers arrive in your town tomorrow. They set up an altar in your place of worship and demand you participate in rituals that violate everything you believe. What do? Accept and survive, hide and preserve your faith in secret, fight back against impossible odds. In 167 BCE, this wasn't hypothetical, it was Tuesday in Judea. The choices Jewish communities made created the ripples we still feel today, including a holiday you might celebrate every December. To understand the revolt, we first need to see the full range of choices Jews faced under Greek pressure. At one end, full accommodation. Leaders like Menelaus embraced Greek culture as progress, gymnasium education, Greek philosophy, Greek religious practices. In the middle, alternative institutions. Onias IV couldn't accept Jerusalem's corruption, but didn't want conflict. He built a separate temple elsewhere. Then came the Hasidim, the pious ones, in Hebrew. They promoted strict observance, Hebrew texts, rejection of Greek religious practices, important clarification. These are not the same as modern Hasidic Judaism, which originated in 18th century Eastern Europe. Same Hebrew root, different movements separated by 2,000 years. At the far end, complete withdrawal. Some displaced priests retreated to the desert, possibly founding the community that created the Dead Sea Scrolls. They chose exit over engagement, quasi-monastic life, preserving documents in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. When archaeologists discovered the texts in the late 1940s, they found writings that had survived 2,000 years precisely because this community chose isolation. Every position on this spectrum represented a valid response to an impossible situation. Each carried distinct costs, non-guaranteed survival, but one family chose a path that would change everything. Mattathias was a Jerusalem priest who had moved to Modein, a village in the Judean hills. When Greek soldiers arrived with a collaborating priest to enforce sacrifice on a pagan altar, Mattathias faced the moment of decision. An altar in this context, a small pillar for offerings, wine, grain, not necessarily animal sacrifice, but the symbolism was clear. Participate in Greek religious practice or face consequences. Mattathias refused. Then he killed both the collaborating priest and the soldier. In that instant, cultural resistance became armed revolt. Mattathias fled to the hills with his sons. They were now outlaws with a death sentence. Mattathias died shortly after the revolt began. Leadership passed to his son Judas, who earned the nickname Maccabees, likely meaning the hammer. He earned it against the professional Greco-Syrian army. Judas deployed guerrilla tactics in terrain he knew intimately. The Judean hills became a death trap for conventional forces, ambushes, night raids, strategic retreats that drew enemies into killing grounds. Victory after victory, the professional army couldn't adapt to an enemy that refused pitched battle, struck without warning, then vanished into the landscape. By 164 BCE, Judas and his forces had fought their way back to Jerusalem itself. The temple had been defiled, Greek sacrifices, shrine elements dedicated to Zeus. Judas and his forces cleansed it, removing every trace of foreign worship. This purification, this rededication of sacred space became Hanukkah. The Hebrew word means dedication. When you see candles lit in December, they commemorate this specific moment, a guerrilla army reclaiming their holiest site after 3 years of impossible warfare. Not a minor holiday about oil lasting 8 days, a celebration of religious freedom won through blood and strategic brilliance. The temple was reclaimed. But what came next? Here's where naming gets confusing. Maccabee was only Judas's personal nickname. The family name was Hasmonean, from their ancestor Hasmoneas. So the dynasty they founded, the Hasmonean Dynasty, not the Maccabean Dynasty. Judas eventually fell in battle. Leadership passed through his brothers, Jonathan, then Simon. Each expanded territory and consolidated power. Eventually, neighboring kingdoms recognized them as legitimate rulers. Even the Greco-Syrian Empire that had tried to destroy them acknowledged Hasmonean authority. The Hasmonean Dynasty ruled from 165 to 63 BCE, roughly a century of independence, the last independent Jewish state until modern Israel over 2,000 years later. Born from one priest's refusal to comply, sustained through guerrilla warfare against a superior military force, legitimized through diplomatic recognition from former enemies. This wasn't inevitable. At every stage, the revolt could have been crushed. The Greco-Syrian Empire had overwhelming resources, but terrain, tactics, and absolute commitment created something that military logic said was impossible. Return to that spectrum of responses. Each position had validity, each carried costs. The Maccabees chose armed resistance. It worked, but required everything: death in battle, years as outlaws, constant risk of annihilation. The Dead Sea Scrolls community chose withdrawal, and they preserved texts that survived 2,000 years, discovered in caves long after their community vanished. The accommodators, their descendants likely assimilated entirely. No distinct identity remained within a few generations, different strategies, different survivals, different losses. When your identity is threatened, there's no neutral choice. Accommodation changes you, withdrawal isolates you, resistance costs you. The Maccabees didn't have better options than everyone else. They made a choice and paid its price. So did the communities that chose differently. Every response shapes what survives. The question isn't which choice was right. The question is, what are you willing to pay and what do you need to preserve?